films, when they do it right, reflect where we are in society at a certain period of time. I mean, they can't lead because, in general, it takes you 2 years to make a film. So usually the whatever it was is moved on in some way or another.
So then you, in 2002, you direct your first film, Confessions of a Dangerous Mind. Had you all along, ever since you'd started working on big movies, decided that you wanted to direct yourself?
Even when I was in television, I never went back to the trailer. When I was an actor, I'm from Kentucky. Being in a trailer is not something you brag about. But I always was on the set. I like to be around the crew. I like to see what the director was up to and the writers were up to in a way. And so I always had the intention of doing it. And there was only one reason. It's completely self-serving, which was I was really aware of the idea that I'm going to age out of the kind of things that I'm going to be allowed to do. And I'm going to be 60 or 65 or 70 or whatever that age was, and have to rely on what some casting director thinks I could play anymore, And I love this industry and I love filmmaking and I love being part of this. And I wanted to continue to be able to be part of this. And so I started writing very early. Directing was something that was a natural progression that I wanted to do. I found a really good script and I thought, because I have a good script, I'm protected in a way as a director for my first directing job. And that was sort of my point, how I got there.
Oh, I see. So it was a sort of originally a kind of defensive idea that you thought
Yes.
of.
Yes. I think always my idea was that I needed to make sure that I didn't have to rely on other people uh, uh, for things that I can't. There's nothing I can do about aging. So I wanted to have other things to. I want to have other jobs, and writing was a big part of it at that point, and I was very involved in that. And then directing was one where once I saw that Confession of a Dangerous Mind, I said, I know what this story is. It's about television, and I lived on a set when I was a kid, where the sets would move. They would do my dad would do the news, and then they would lift up the desks where he did the news on strings, and they'd come up. It was in Cincinnati, Ohio. They'd come up in those strings, and underneath it would be a bowling alley, a 2-lane bowling alley, and they would do Bowling for Dollars like at 7:30, a television show. So I love the magic of television, sort of in that era, creating these game shows and things like that. And I thought that I had a take on what to do with that film.
And then Syriana, you get a Best Supporting Actor BAFTA for that. But did you think that the fact that you were doing writing and directing, do you think that then changed your choices as an actor as well?
Sure. But all along, my choices changed really once I'd done the 3 in a row. I did Out of Sight, Three Kings, and Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And I knew that those 3 screenplays were great. And I knew then that, and I got great reviews on all of them. And then I got to the point where I thought, I wasn't, I got killed for Batman and Robin the year before Out of Sight. It's not like I learned how to act along the way, and then suddenly in Out of Sight, I was a good actor. It was, I need the protection of a good screenplay. And so once that became the ground, the basis for everything, then it was just about finding good screenplays. And sometimes that fails anyway. Sometimes it still doesn't work, but at least you're starting from a position where there's a chance, and that's all you can do.
But they're not just good screenplays. They're also really interesting screenplays that you're taking on that have, and there's quite often, would you think there are themes possibly starting about then? Because we're beginning to see quite a lot of shadowy maneuvering of various organizations, whether it's governments or corporations, coming up in your filmography from then onwards.
A little bit of that. Films, when they do it right, reflect where we are in society at a certain period of time. They can't lead because, in general, it takes you 2 years to make a film. So usually whatever it was is moved on in some way or another. But we were in a pretty interesting time in the early 2000s where we were drumming up this war that no one would speak out loud. I was in London the day that there was the march, and it was really interesting because I flew from London to Berlin, the Berlin Film Festival that day. And I was in London where 2 million people marched against their government going to war. And then I landed in Germany where 1 million Germans were marching in support of their government for not going to war. And, and I had been very vocal about that. And, there was a lot of punditry and people who had picketed my films and, did hour shows on Fox about how my career is over. And I wanted to pick fights. I wanted to pick fights. I believe in picking fights. I believe in it deep in my soul. I think my father taught me one thing very important when I was a young kid, which he said, you stand up to you stand up to people with power, and you stand up for people who have less power. Period. If you do that in your life, you win. That's it. That's all you have to do. And I felt like I was now at a point in my career where I was able to do that in storytelling, and so there was a bit of a turn after like the first Oceans film, where I was able to, I wrote Good Night and Good Luck because I was mad at I was looking for other times when the Fourth Estate dropped the ball. When the Fourth Estate didn't challenge the other three estates about going to war. And I was angry. And I looked back at other times when the Fourth Estate was dropping the ball and remembered this moment with Murrow and McCarthy and thought this is sort of a good example of when it gets it right, when journalism gets it right. And I'm the son of a journalist. It's important to me that it gets it right.
So Good Night and Good Luck is 2005, and you co-wrote this with Grant Heslov. This was something that you'd discussed this whole period with Senator Joseph McCarthy and the networks and Murrow, and had you talked about all of this with your father a lot? Or?
Yeah, and it's funny, I had just done Failsafe as a live television show, and it was the first thing that brought live TV back. It was a big deal, hard to get done, really pushed to get it done, black and white, and it was sort of on the heels of the Y2K and everything coming in, and so the nuclear arguments were coming back. And so I wrote it to be a live television show. And then the Super Bowl happened, and Janet Jackson showed her breasts, or Justin Timberlake pulled off her thing and showed her breasts, and they pulled our live TV show. They said no more live TV, and they pulled it. And was depressed for a day. And then I called up Grant and said, let's write this let's take the commercial breaks out and let's make it into a film, and we'll make it. So we we had just helped start Warner Independent, which was a smaller branch it was a thing to answer Miramax and the smaller groups at the studio. And we got the movie made, and we went out and shopped it around and raised $6 million, shot it for $6 million in 24 days. On one soundstage, and it was an exciting thing because there isn't much writing on it when it's $6 million, so you're allowed to do what you want and say what you want,
including making it in black and white, which
is hard to do. It's really hard to do. I mean, imagine how there are a few films now that come out in black and white. It was hard, man. They didn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole because at that point, everything leaned on cable at the end, right? So at the end of it, after your run, which would be, if it's a small film, it's going to be, you'll make $100,000 or something. We did a lot better than that. We made, I don't know, $40, $50 million. But at the beginning of the film, all they look at is how can they get their money back, the investors. And the way they get their money back is by selling it to cable. And cable wouldn't touch black and white. They didn't want to touch Schindler's List. They wouldn't touch black and white. So it was it was sort of, I had to put my the mortgage of my house up against it, which was interesting. And I wasn't worried. I had a day job. I could make some money back if I lost it.
Well, thank goodness you did, because it's terrific. We're going to see a little excerpt now, and this is Edward R. Murrow, played by David Strathairn, and Fred Friendly, his producer, played by you.
Oh,
this is when they're first starting to think about the So if we can see the clip from that, please.
Fellas, our next show is going to be about Senator McCarthy, and we're going to go right at him. I don't need to tell you how careful we have to be. If we are to do this, then Ed and I need you to be straight with us. We need to know, for the good of the piece, if any of you have any connection at all, if you subscribe to a newsletter, if you attended a party, anything that could compromise this, anything at all, because now would be the time to tell us.
Ed, I think I should excuse myself.
Palmer, kidding me?
My ex was I wouldn't say she was a communist, but she certainly attended meetings. It's before we were married. I didn't even really know about it until after the divorce. It was different then. We were all on the same side. I'm not telling you guys anything you don't know. The thing of it is, somebody will find out. They'll hurt us with it. I should have told you sooner, Ed. I'm sorry. Fred?
None of us had ever read a dangerous book or had a friend who was different or never joined an organization that advocated change. We'd all be just the kind of people Joe McCarthy wants. We're going to go with the story, because the terror is right here in this room.
John, Jesse, go through the HUAC hearings. Eddie, Palmer, looking at the interviews and any speeches. Okay, fellas, here we go. His own words. That's what we need.
Said that he wouldn't remove that general from the army who cleared a communist major. I said, then, General, you should be removed from any command.
Good night and good luck there.
I wish you could take credit for writing that scene, but all of the guys in that room were journalists, and all of them wrote books, and every single one of them wrote that scene as it is, exactly as that is. So we felt like that was pretty accurate all the way down the line.
Yeah.
And that's Tom McCarthy, who went on to direct wonderful films, including the film Spotlight that won the Academy Award, and David Strathairn giving one of the just beautiful performance. It's not an impersonation. It's just a beautiful performance.
And how is it directing yourself?
A drag. Embarrassing. It's embarrassing. You don't want to, you don't want to do more takes on yourself than you do on other people, because then you look like a jerk. And it's hard. It's hard to do. Look, it's not hard. I cut tobacco for a living. That's hard. But it's tricky because you're asking other actors. Like if I'm doing a scene, if you and I were doing a scene together, it's a really rotten thing for the other actor to say to you, okay, we'll do it again. This time, do it a little faster, right? Two actors aren't supposed to have that conversation. And as a director, I'm looking at another actor going, okay. So it's a drag when you're in the scene and you're directing. It's sort of unfair to the other actors as well. I don't enjoy it. It was a pretty small part in that one, so it was easier to do. I could focus on David and what we were trying to get accomplished.
But I guess it's also, essential and sometimes, for raising finances and things too.
It is. There have been plenty of films that I've just jumped on just to get. I remember I did a movie called Welcome to Collingwood. It was the Russo brothers, big sort of break into LA, into Hollywood. They'd done this other really tiny film, and we wanted to introduce them to Hollywood. And now they're like the biggest things in the world. They're really sweet, really wonderful guys. But I just got on it because I wanted to help them get the film made, So that's the fun part of it about it.